Good evening, sweetheart. It's Maggie. Come sit with me. Let's make this night a gentler one. Tonight arrived without announcement. No rain tapping at the window. No wind worrying the eaves. Not even the familiar sigh of a passing car. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't rush in. It simply notices you're alone and decides to stay. I realized it the moment I set my cup down. The sound felt louder than it should have been, as if the room were listening too closely. I held still after that, almost apologetic, as though I'd interrupted something sacred. The lamp glowed the same warm gold it always does, but tonight it felt insufficient, not dim, just outnumbered. The light reached the edges of the room and then seemed to hesitate, unsure what to do with all that space. Lily was already curled at my feet, quiet in that unusually deliberate way dogs have when they sense a shift they can't name. She didn't lift her head, didn't sigh, just stayed. I took a slow sip of my tea, chamomile again, and noticed it had cooled faster than usual. Or maybe I was just more aware of time tonight. Some evenings fill themselves, others wait to be filled. Tonight felt like the second kind. I leaned back in the chair. The sound echoed a little longer than expected, not because it was loud, but because there was nothing else to soften it. That's when I understood. The room wasn't lonely. It was wide. There's a difference. Loneliness aches. Width simply expands. And expansion, when you're not ready for it, can feel unsettling. I glanced toward the hallway, half expecting some familiar noise. The refrigerator hum, the house settling, anything. But the house seemed to be holding its breath with me. At 63, I've learned to recognize when a moment is asking something of me without using words. This one wasn't asking for action. It was asking for acknowledgement. I rested my hands around the cup, letting what little warmth remained seep into my palms. My fingers have always been the first to notice when an evening is different. They're honest that way. You know, we talk so much about learning to enjoy silence, but no one tells you that sometimes silence arrives heavier than expected. Not sharp, not cruel, just present, like a chair pulled out across from you that no one sits in. I didn't feel sad. That surprised me. I didn't feel anxious either. Just aware. Aware of the size of the room. Aware of my own breathing. Aware of how still everything had become. Even Lily shifted closer, her back pressing lightly against my ankle. Animals don't fill silence with thoughts. They fill it with bodies. Sometimes that's enough. I glanced toward the small radio on the shelf, the one I rarely turn on before bed. I didn't reach for it yet, not because I didn't want sound, but because I wanted to understand the quiet first. Some silences ask to be endured, others ask to be softened. Tonight hadn't decided which one it was, so I stayed still a moment longer, listening to what wasn't there, feeling the evening stretch gently around me. And only then did I realize this wasn't an ordinary quiet. It was the kind of silence that asks to be met halfway, not ignored, not feared, just acknowledged. We'll decide together what comes next. For now, sweetheart, let's sit with it just a little longer. Silence doesn't always arrive all at once. Sometimes it settles in layers. I noticed the first layer when my shoulders didn't relax the way they usually do. Usually by this time of evening, my body understands the ritual. Chair, tea, lamp, Lily at my feet, and it lets go. But tonight, my shoulders stayed politely alert. That's when I realized the quiet had begun to feel physical, not loud, not heavy, just present in a way I could feel against my skin, like air before snow. I shifted in the chair. The sound startled me, not because it was sudden, but because it traveled farther than expected. It didn't fade into background noise. It stood alone. I smiled at that, a small, amused recognition. Well, so that's how quiet it is tonight. I listened for something familiar, the ticking of the clock in the kitchen, the faint hum of electricity in the walls. They were all there, of course, but tonight each sound felt isolated, like stars scattered too far apart to form a constellation. When you're younger, silence can feel like freedom. No one asking, no one needing. But as years gather, silence changes shape. It becomes spacious, and space, when you're not expecting it, can make you feel smaller than usual. Not unimportant, just unanchored. I took another sip of my tea, not because I was thirsty, but because the motion felt grounding. The warmth helped, just enough to remind me where my hands were, where I was. I thought about evenings long ago when silence was impossible, the house always speaking, footsteps, doors, someone clearing their throat in the next room. Back then, quiet was something you had to chase. Now it finds you, sometimes kindly, sometimes insistently. Tonight, it felt insistent. I looked down at Lily again. She hadn't moved. Dogs don't measure silence the way we do. They don't ask what it means or how long it will last. They simply decide whether it's safe. And clearly, she had decided it was. That steadied me more than I expected. I let my breath slow to match hers. In, out, until the quiet no longer felt like it was pressing inward. There's a moment, usually unnoticed, when silence stops being empty and starts being informative. It tells you how much space you're holding inside yourself. Tonight told me I was holding quite a lot. Not grief, not worry, just room. Room where voices used to echo. Room where habits used to fill corners without asking. And that's when I understood why the room felt so wide. It wasn't missing anything. It was reflecting me. I sat with that thought, letting it settle without judgment. No need to fix it. No need to fill it. Not yet. Some realizations need to rest a moment before you decide what to do with them. So I stayed where I was, tea cooling slowly in my hands, Lily breathing steadily at my feet, the quiet no longer strange, just honest. And as the silence continued to shape itself around me, I realized something important. This wasn't a silence to escape. It was a silence to understand. We'll see, sweetheart, what it asks for next. After a while, sitting still began to feel noticeable, not uncomfortable, just present. So I stood up slowly, not because I needed to, but because the room felt large enough to invite movement. The sound lingered again, stretching itself thin across the quiet. I waited for it to fade. It did, eventually. As I walked toward the window, my footsteps sounded different tonight. Each one landed with intention, as though the floor were gently counting them. I don't usually notice the sound of my own walking, but this evening, everything seemed to announce itself. The The curtains hung perfectly still, no breeze, no ripple, just fabric holding its shape. I rested my hand against the glass for a moment. Cool, steady. The street outside looked the same as always, but it felt farther away. The room behind me felt wide now, not empty, wide, like a church after everyone has gone home. Not sad, just echoing. I returned to my chair and sat again. Lily lifted her head this time, watching me with calm eyes. "Still me," I whispered, not to her, but to the evening. She seemed satisfied with that answer and settled back down. I wrapped both hands around my cup again. The tea was nearly lukewarm now. Not unpleasant, just different. Even warmth, I've learned, has a window. Miss it, and you must accept the next version. I didn't reheat it. Tonight didn't feel like a night for corrections. It felt like a night for noticing. The lamp's glow pooled softly on the rug, but it didn't reach the far wall. That wall sat quietly in shadow, unbothered by the attention it wasn't receiving. And for some reason, that felt important. Not everything needs to be lit. I thought of all the evenings in my life that were crowded, with voices, with expectations, with unspoken responsibilities. Those nights had felt smaller somehow, despite being full. This one felt large because it was honest. A house reveals itself when it's quiet. So does a heart. I realized then that the silence wasn't asking to be filled. It was asking to be shared. Shared with what? Not words, not thoughts. Presence. I returned to the chair once more, settling in. The sound no longer startled me. It belonged now. The room didn't feel quite as wide anymore, not because it had shrunk, but because I had taken my place inside it. And in that moment, I understood something gentle and true. Some evenings don't need noise. They need you to show up fully and stay. We're not finished yet, sweetheart. The night still has one more question to ask. I didn't decide to turn the music on. Not exactly. My hand simply moved toward the shelf where the small radio rests, the one I almost never touch this late. It wasn't a restless movement. It was thoughtful, like reaching for a shawl when the air hasn't turned cold yet, but you know it will. I turned the dial slowly, not searching for a song, just for a presence. The first sound that came through was barely a sound at all. A soft swell, a low note, then another. No lyrics, just something breathing. The music didn't break the silence. It leaned into it, like a candle placed gently in the center of a room that never asked to be bright. I kept the volume low, so low it almost felt unnecessary, but it changed the shape of the space immediately. The room felt occupied, not crowded, just accompanied. Lily lifted her head again at the sound. She listened for a moment, then rested her chin back down, as if to say, "All right, that's acceptable." I smiled at that. Some evenings require negotiation, even with the dog. Music moves slowly, unconcerned with attention. It didn't try to fill the room. It simply existed in it. And suddenly, the silence no longer felt vast. It felt intentional. I took another sip of tea, cool now, but still comforting. The sound of the cup meeting the table blended into the music this time, instead of standing alone. That felt important. Music, I realized, isn't always about sound. Sometimes it's about permission. Permission for the room to feel held. Permission for the evening to soften its edges. I didn't choose a memory with the music. It chose its own. Not a specific moment, just a feeling. The kind that reminds you you don't have to carry the quiet by yourself. I leaned back in the chair. The creak no longer startled me. It belonged to the rhythm now. The room exhaled. So did I. And for the first time tonight, the silence didn't feel like something to solve. It felt like something to share. I let the music play on, soft and steady, as if it had always been part of the evening, just waiting to be invited. Sometimes, sweetheart, we don't need joy. We need company. And tonight, this was enough. After a while, I stopped noticing where the music began and where the room ended. That's how I knew it was the right volume. The notes didn't drift toward me. They stayed where they were, like a quiet companion sitting across the room with no intention of filling the space between us. I wrapped my hands around the cup again, mostly out of habit. The tea had cooled completely now, but I didn't mind. Some warmth lingers even after the heat is gone. I've noticed that about people too. lamplight caught the faint steam one last time, not rising, just hovering, as if it hadn't quite decided whether to leave yet. That small moment, steam barely visible, music barely audible, light barely shifting, felt like the center of the evening. Not dramatic, not emotional, just honest. I realized then that the silence earlier hadn't been empty. It had been asking something, not loudly, not urgently, just quietly persistent. Maybe it wanted acknowledgement, or maybe it wanted reassurance that it didn't mean loneliness, that silence and aloneness aren't always the same thing. When you live long enough, you learn the difference. At 63, I've sat in many kinds of quiet, the peaceful kind, the heavy kind, the kind that wraps itself around you, and the kind that waits politely at the door. Tonight's silence was the waiting kind, and the music was my way of opening the door without making a speech. Lily shifted again, stretching her legs just enough to touch mine. No urgency, just contact. I rested my hand briefly on her back, not to comfort her, but to confirm something for myself. We were both here. The song moved into a slightly higher note then, not brighter, just lifted, like someone standing up slowly after sitting too long. It made me think about how often we try to fix our evenings, add something, remove something, distract ourselves from something. But tonight, I didn't need fixing. I needed adjusting. A gentle shift, a small sound, a reminder that presence doesn't have to be loud to be real. I looked around the room again. Nothing had changed. The chair was still worn. The lamp still hummed faintly. The walls still held their familiar shadows. But the room no longer felt oversized. It fit me again. And that's when I understood. Silence doesn't grow large because it's empty. It grows large when we forget to meet it halfway. I took a deeper breath than I had all evening. Not intentionally, just naturally. The music continued, unconcerned with my thoughts. That felt comforting. Some things don't need to respond to us to be good company. I let the evening settle the way it wanted to, with sound and quiet resting side by side. And for the first time tonight, the room didn't feel like something I was inside of. It felt like something I belonged to. I stayed there like that for a while, listening without listening, thinking without effort, being without explanation. And in that gentle balance, the silence finally softened. Not because it was gone, but because it had been heard. The music eventually reached its end, not with a final note, but with a kind of quiet acceptance. I didn't rush to turn it off. I let the last vibration fade on its own, the way evenings deserve to end, without being pushed. The room returned to silence, but it was different now, smaller, kinder, no longer stretching its arms too wide. I shifted in the chair, feeling the familiar give beneath me, the sound of old wood answering my weight without complaint. At 63, I appreciate things that don't argue when you lean on them. I picked up my cup one last time, mostly to feel its shape in my hands. The tea was gone now, but the cup still carried warmth from everything it had held earlier. Some containers remember their purpose long after they're empty. Lily sighed at my feet, a long, satisfied breath, as if she'd been keeping watch until the evening finally found its balance. I reached down and brushed my fingers through the fur behind her ears, slowly, absently, the way you touch something you trust. Outside, the night remains still. No rain, no wind asking questions, just a January quiet holding its place. I realized then that silence doesn't need filling every time. Sometimes it only needs company, not noise, not conversation, just presence. Tonight reminded me of that. The room hadn't been too quiet. I had simply been listening too hard for something that wasn't missing. I leaned back, letting my shoulders drop the way they do when they finally believe they're allowed to rest. The lamplight remained steady, that soft, faithful glow that never tries to be more than what it already is. I've come to trust that kind of light, the kind that doesn't chase darkness away, but makes room beside it. As the evening settled into its final shape, I felt something simple and true rest gently in my chest. Not every quiet night is a warning. Some are invitations. An invitation to slow down, to sit with yourself, to notice the difference between being alone and being at peace. And so, sweetheart, if tonight feels quieter than usual for you, I hope you don't rush to fill it. Maybe just sit with it for a moment. See what it has to say. For me, this evening didn't need more sound. It only needed acknowledgement. Thank you for sitting here with me, through the silence, through the soft music, through the small shifts that made the room feel right again. Rest well tonight, sweetheart. Good night from me.